After Clint Eastwood's longtime girlfriend died at the age of 61, a representative from the Monterey County Health Department confirms to the Post that Christina died of a heart attack.
At 94 years old, Clint Eastwood did something no one thought possible. He directed his 42nd film. Critics called it his best work in a decade. But behind the scenes, he was dealing with a loss that changed everything. His longtime partner had just passed away without warning. His son later said he was doing good, but the words felt careful. Then came a strange interview that Eastwood himself called completely phony. Something deeper was happening, and when the truth finally came out, it explained why this might be the last time we ever hear from him. Clint Eastwood entered the world on May 31, 1930 in San Francisco, and the first thing people noticed was his size. He weighed 11 pounds, 6 ounces, so the nurses called him Samson before anyone even filled out the paperwork. His parents, Clinton Sr. and Ruth, took him home to Oakland's Lake Merritt neighborhood, trying to build a stable life even while the Great Depression kept reshaping their plans. His father worked as a bond salesman at first, and later found a long-term path at Georgia Pacific, while his mother stayed home until the children grew older, and then joined IBM as a clerk. Clint grew up with one sibling, his younger sister Jeanne, and the family moved from town to town during the 1930s, chasing opportunities as the economy struggled. These early shifts felt like survival at the time, yet years later that story would be twisted in a way no one expected. For decades, Clint mentioned poverty and spoke like someone raised on hardship. He leaned into the narrative of a rough childhood shaped by the Depression. Then Sandra Locke, who lived with him from 1975 to 1989, broke that image wide open. She revealed how the family eventually settled in Piedmont in 1940, one of the wealthiest suburbs in Northern California. They had a private swimming pool, a country club membership, and enough money for every family member to drive their own car. It created a shock because very few families in 1940s America had even one car, let alone several. Locke said very plainly that they were never poor. That truth complicated the story Clint liked to tell about himself, yet the contrast between early uncertainty and teenage privilege quietly shaped the way he moved through the world. Even with the comfort around him, Clint rebelled against school every step of the way. He cared about cars, girls, and beer, and almost nothing else. He was held back one full grade in middle school. When he entered Piedmont High in January 1945, the restlessness only grew stronger. Within a year, he was expelled for a mix of reckless stunts, including scrawling an obscene message on the scoreboard, burning someone in effigy, and riding his bicycle across a soaked sports field until he ruined the grass. By that time, he was already 6 feet, 4 inches tall, all lanky limbs, leather jackets, and a ducktail hairstyle. He transferred to Oakland Technical High School and finally graduated on February 2, 1949. Through all of it, the only subjects that truly caught his attention were music and mechanical work. The year 1949 became even more defining when his parents and sister packed up and moved to Seattle. Clint stayed behind in California at 18, choosing independence over comfort. While the rest of the family settled into a new life in the Pacific Northwest, he found jobs wherever he could. He worked as a firefighter, a golf caddy, and a lifeguard, drifting through Oakland and nearby towns with no clear path but plenty of determination. That choice to remain in California placed him exactly where he needed to be for what was coming. Only 2 years later, in 1951, he was drafted into the Army and sent to Fort Ord as a swimming instructor. A Universal Studios employee spotted him on the base, and that moment, almost accidental, became the first spark of a Hollywood future. Even though the Eastwood family had money by the time they reached Piedmont, the memories of all the earlier relocations stayed with Clint. he absorbed his father's disciplined approach to work. He learned from Ruth's shift from homemaker to corporate clerk. He understood how easily stability could disappear and how hard someone had to work to keep it steady. These subtle lessons shaped his belief in efficiency long before he stepped onto a film set. Later, when he became known for shooting films quickly, quietly, and under budget, he credited that mindset to the values formed during the Depression years, even if he himself never lived the poverty he described in public. Everything changed again on September 30th, 1951, when Clint, now 21, boarded a Navy aircraft after visiting his girlfriend in Seattle. He had worn his uniform to get a free military passenger ride, something many soldiers did at the time. The Douglas AD-1Q Sky Raider left Sandpoint Naval Air Station and headed for California. What began as a routine lift turned into a fight for survival. Clint was serving stateside during the Korean War, working as a swimming instructor at Fort Ord, and he had never seen combat. Yet, on that evening, his near-death experience came from the sky rather than the battlefield. At 18:25 hours, everything inside the aircraft began to fail. The radio system died, cutting off all communication. Moments later, the oxygen system failed too, leaving the pilot and passenger gasping as the altitude pressed down on them. The navigation system went dark, so the pilot had no working instruments to guide him while thick fog rolled across the coast. Even the intercom between the cockpit and Clint's seat went silent. The companion aircraft disappeared into the haze, and the fuel drained faster than expected. By the time the Sky Raider reached the waters off Point Reyes, the tanks were empty, leaving the pilot no choice but to ditch the plane into the cold Pacific, about 2 miles offshore. The landing was rough but upright, giving Clint and Lieutenant Francis Anderson just enough time to escape into the freezing water. They inflated 2 rafts and paddled away from the sinking aircraft, which dropped roughly 150 feet into the ocean and vanished. Strong currents pulled the men apart until Clint was alone, fighting his way toward a faint lighthouse light on the distant shore. He swam and rowed through icy water for nearly an hour, his arms burning, his body shaking, yet the only option was forward. When he reached land, he wandered inland until he found the RCA radio station at Point Reyes. The station operator later said Clint looked dazed and barely able to speak. Years later, when Captain Chesley Sullenberger hesitated to allow a movie about his 2009 Hudson River landing, everything changed the moment he learned that Clint Eastwood had survived a similar crash in 1951. That shared understanding broke down Sullenberger's resistance. Their connection helped Clint bring an authenticity to the 2016 film Sully that only someone who had once felt cold water closing in around their body could understand. The crash also altered Clint's path in ways no one predicted. Before the incident, he was scheduled for overseas deployment to Korea. The investigation and medical evaluations that followed caused delays, and by the time the paperwork cleared, his deployment had been canceled. Many young soldiers sent that year never returned home. Instead, Clint remained at Fort Ord as a lifeguard for the rest of his service, the same skill that kept him alive in the Pacific. That experience sharpened his sense of risk and mortality, something that later showed in his films, both as actor and director. After leaving the Army, he jumped into Hollywood with no map and very little money. He dug swimming pools, he drove garbage trucks, he tried LA City College, but left to focus on acting. His roles were tiny and uncredited, appearing for only minutes in films like Revenge of the Creature in 1955. Then, on October 23, 1955, Universal Studios dropped him entirely. Executives said he looked odd with his pronounced Adam's apple, slow speech, and chipped tooth. For the next 3 years, he floated through the industry wondering if the door to acting would ever reopen. Everything shifted in 1958 when Charles Marcus Warren cast him as Rowdy Yates in Rawhide. The show premiered on January 9, 1959, and became Clint's first steady job. At the start, he earned about $700 to $750 per episode. Not much by today's standards, but enough to lift him out of constant financial stress. Millions of viewers welcomed him into their living rooms every Friday night. As the seasons passed, his salary rose to around $100,000 a year, but he still felt boxed in. Rowdy Yates was energetic, loyal, and straightforward. Yet Clint knew there was more inside him waiting for a role that would let him explore it. By 1965, Rawhide began to unravel. That summer, CBS fired Eric Fleming and several cast members to cut costs. Fleming said publicly that he was earning $220,000 that year, though some believed he exaggerated. Clint became the new trail boss, but CBS didn't raise his pay at all. He was frustrated and felt the show had lost its rhythm. Then the network made a risky scheduling move, shifting Rawhide to Tuesday nights, where it faced stiff competition. After only 13 episodes with Clint as the lead, CBS canceled the series in December 1965. Fleming died the following year on September 28, 1966, while filming in Peru, leaving a tragic shadow over the show's history. What makes this period even more remarkable is that Clint almost missed the opportunity that would change his life. During a break between seasons 6 and 7, Italian director Sergio Leone wanted him for a small Western filming in Spain. Clint wasn't especially excited. He was focused on golf and didn't see much potential in the offer. The pay was only $15,000. The director didn't speak English. The film looked like an experiment more than a career move. He took the job mainly out of curiosity. He had no idea how close this moment came to slipping away. Leone had first asked Eric Fleming, who refused because he earned far more on Rawhide. Charles Bronson read the script and dismissed it as the worst he had ever seen. Richard Harrison also declined, but he remembered Clint from a low-budget Western and recommended him. That single suggestion changed Hollywood history. A Fistful of Dollars was filmed on a tight $200,000 budget near Madrid. Crew members went unpaid at times and even removed the set's windows in protest. The film released on September 12, 1964, in Italy, and blew past every expectation, earning $19.9 million worldwide. No one told Clint any of this until weeks later. He didn't realize that a movie he approached casually had just reshaped his career. Success grew fast. The second film, for a few dollars more, cost $600,000 to make and earned $15 million. Clint's salary rose to $50,000. When Leone prepared the final film, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint hesitated again. The director nearly replaced him with Bronson, but Clint returned after being offered $250,000 plus 10% of the Western box office profits. That film earned $38.9 million worldwide, and by the end of the trilogy, he had transformed into a global star. Clint liked to reflect on how easily he could have missed all of it. If he had chosen golf over that trip to Spain, he might have remained a TV side character earning $700 an episode. Instead, the man with no name introduced him to audiences in a way Rawhide never could. His silence, his stillness, and the sharp look in his eyes became his trademarks, a style that influenced decades of cinema. By 1968, the numbers said everything. He made $400,000 plus 25% of net profits for Hang 'em High, $750,000 for Where Eagles Dare, and $1 million for Coogan's Bluff. In just 4 years, he went from $15,000 to more than $1 million per film, one of the most dramatic salary jumps Hollywood has ever seen. Dirty Harry arrived in theaters on December 23, 1971, and the timing alone made people uneasy. Northern California was still living under the shadow of the Zodiac Killer, a real murderer who had shot, stabbed, and terrified the region between 1968 and 1969. At least 5 people were confirmed dead, with the last known killing happening on October 11, 1969, when cab driver Paul Stein was shot in San Francisco. The Zodiac had flooded newspapers with taunting letters, bragging about killing 37 people, even though police could only confirm 5. By late 1971, investigators had nothing. No arrest, no suspect, no name. Then suddenly, audiences were sitting in dark theaters watching a fictional cop hunt down Scorpio, a killer clearly modeled after Zodiac, complete with random violence and mocking messages to the press. The chill came from knowing that on screen, justice was swift, while in real life the city had been left helpless just 2 years earlier. That discomfort spilled straight into the streets. When the 1971 Academy Awards rolled around, protesters gathered outside holding signs that read, "Dirty Harry is a rotten pig." The country was already raw. The Kent State shootings were only a year old. Vietnam was tearing the nation apart, and trust in law enforcement was collapsing as stories of entrapment, abuse, and corruption filled the news. Clint Eastwood was openly hissed at during appearances in the Bay Area, especially by feminist groups. Critics said the film glorified police brutality at the worst possible moment. The anger was not only about one movie, it was tied to the still-burning debate over the 1966 Miranda versus Arizona decision, which required police to inform suspects of their rights. Conservatives believed it protected criminals. Civil rights groups feared unchecked power. Dirty Harry landed directly in the middle of that collision. The word fascist followed the film almost immediately. Much of it centered on the scene at Khazar Stadium, where Harry shoots Scorpio in the leg and grinds his foot into the wound to force information about a kidnapped girl. Eastwood never denied that the film violated Miranda rules. Harry searches without a warrant. He tortures without reading rights. Yet the story does not let him win. When the district attorney explains that Scorpio must be released because the evidence was illegally obtained, Harry fires back with a simple question about the girl's rights. The answer cuts hard. The district attorney says his office speaks for her, if Harry would let them. In the end, the system rejects Harry completely. The killer walks. Harry throws away his badge. The film closes not with triumph, but with disgust toward both chaos and the law itself. That question about who speaks for victims hit a nerve because in 1971, the answer was uncomfortable. Victims' rights groups barely existed. The National Organization for Victim Assistance would not be founded until 1975. The first rape crisis center in the United States opened the same year Dirty Harry premiered. Miranda versus Arizona was still fresh, decided by a narrow 5-4 vote in 1966, and Congress had already tried and failed to weaken it with a 1968 law. When Scorpio demanded his $200,000 ransom while a teenage girl suffocated underground, Harry's question exposed a real gap in the system. The law focused on protecting the accused, while organized advocacy for victims was still years away. Instead of fading, the controversy made the film explode. Dirty Harry earned $28.1 million at the domestic box office and launched 4 sequels. People frustrated by Vietnam, crime, and a sense of powerlessness saw something raw reflected back at them. One line echoed everywhere, often misquoted, about feeling lucky. Decades later, the meaning of the film was still being argued. In 2012, exactly 41 years after its release, the Library of Congress added Dirty Harry to the National Film Registry. The explanation was simple and telling. These films are not chosen because they are perfect. They are chosen because they reflect who Americans were at a moment in time. The same movie once called fascist propaganda was now preserved as a cultural document. While all of that noise surrounded Dirty Harry, Clint Eastwood was quietly building something else. In 1971, the same year the film made him a superstar, he directed his first movie, Play Misty for Me. He shot it in Carmel, California, his hometown, and proved he could control a story from behind the camera. The success gave him leverage. Throughout the 1970s, he acted and directed at the same time, moving through films like High Plains Drifter in 1972, The Eiger Sanction in 1975, and The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976. By directing himself, he stepped away from being only a gunman and began exploring guilt, consequence, and moral weight. The cowboy image started to crack open. That long shift paid off years later. On March 29, 1993, at the 65th Academy Awards, Unforgiven changed everything. The film won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, and Eastwood joined a small group of actors who had directed themselves to a win. He was 62 years old. The movie earned $159.2 million worldwide on a $14.4 million budget and tore apart the myths of the Western genre he once helped define. He dedicated it to Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, the men who shaped his early career. Even when he lost Best Actor to Al Pacino, the message was clear. Eastwood had rewritten his own legacy. He did it again with even more force a decade later. On February 27, 2005, Million Dollar Baby dominated the 77th Academy Awards, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actor. The $30 million film earned $216.8 million worldwide and beat heavily favored competitors. Eastwood was everywhere in the project, directing, producing, composing, and acting. When he accepted Best Director, he was 74 years and 272 days old, making him the oldest person to win the award at that time. It came 12 years after Unforgiven, proving the earlier success was not a fluke. At an age when most filmmakers slow down, he was producing his most emotionally complex work. Part of how he kept working came from the way he worked. Eastwood became famous for shooting one take, sometimes 2. Actors learned quickly to be ready. There was little rehearsal, no endless repetition. He believed real conversations happen once, not after 50 attempts. The set stayed calm, budgets stayed low, schedules stayed tight. The performances felt loose and human, not engineered. His method showed that restraint could sharpen creativity instead of limiting it. Away from the camera, his personal life was just as complicated. Between 1954 and 1996, Clint Eastwood fathered at least 8 children with 6 different women, spanning 42 years between the oldest and youngest. Several of those children were born while he was married to Maggie Johnson, his wife from 1953 to 1984. One daughter, Kimber, born on June 17, 1964, remained secret for 25 years until it surfaced publicly in July 1989. Even with his name on the birth certificate, the truth stayed buried as his fame grew. During that long marriage, Eastwood lived openly as if he were single. He admitted as early as 1963 that he planned to do as he pleased and described affairs as addictive. Women moved through his life on studio lots and acting classes, while Maggie Johnson endured quietly. People around them saw the strain. Some described the marriage as open. Others described visible pain. One affair, with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis, began in 1959 and lasted about 14 years. It produced Kimber. The relationship played out openly on sets, while the marriage continued. Later came the explosive relationship with Sandra Locke, which lasted 13 years and ended in a $70 million lawsuit filed on April 26, 1989. Locke accused Eastwood of betrayal, coercion, and manipulation. She later learned that during the final years of their relationship, he had secretly fathered 2 children with another woman. The case settled through a $1.5 million directing deal that later unraveled in court when it was revealed to be a sham. A jury quickly sided with Locke before another settlement closed the case. At 78 years old, Clint Eastwood walked into January 2009 and quietly did something Hollywood said was no longer possible. Gran Torino started small, opening in just 84 theaters, almost like a test. The first weekend brought in only $271,720, which looked modest on paper. Then something shifted. Word spread. The film exploded outward, theaters, and suddenly pulled in $29 million in its wide opening weekend. That single number erased his old personal record of $18.1 million from Space Cowboys. What made it even more striking was the scale of the risk. Gran Torino cost only $33 million to make. By the time its run ended, it had earned $269.9 million worldwide, more than 11 times its budget. Each theater averaged $10,337, giving Eastwood the biggest nationwide launch of his entire career as both actor and director. A quiet story about an aging Korean War veteran and his Hmong neighbors had connected far beyond expectations, and it proved that age had nothing to do with relevance. That momentum carried into an even bigger cultural moment a few years later. When American Sniper arrived in January 2015, it did not creep into theaters. It burst through the door. In just its first 4 days, the film earned $105.3 million, the largest opening weekend ever recorded for a drama. By the end of its run, the worldwide total reached $547.7 million, against a budget between $58 and $59 million. That gap made it the second most profitable film of 2014, trailing only Transformers: Age of Extinction, with an estimated profit of $243 million. It passed Saving Private Ryan to become the highest-grossing war film of all time, and became only the 7th R-rated movie to cross the 500 million mark. Bradley Cooper's portrayal of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle earned 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. At the same time, the film ignited backlash. During Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, filmmaker Michael Moore publicly attacked the movie, calling snipers cowards and criticizing the language used toward Iraqis. Praise and outrage collided, and the film became impossible to ignore. Just a few years earlier, Eastwood had already shown he could dominate headlines without a movie at all. On August 30, 2012, at 82 years old, he stepped onto the stage at the Republican National Convention in Tampa, Florida, and delivered a 12-minute speech that no one saw coming. Instead of a polished address, he spoke to an empty chair meant to represent President Barack Obama. Nearly 30 million people watched it live. The response was immediate and brutal. Roger Ebert called it sad and pathetic. Even Republican advisors quietly described it as strange and weird. Eastwood did not back down. He later said he was aiming for people in the middle, not trying to please anyone on the extremes. Jon Stewart summed it up best, joking that the speech revealed a version of Obama only Republicans could see, one that looked nothing like reality. A month later, the moment became even more surreal. In September 2012, Eastwood admitted the empty chair was never planned. He explained that a stool had been sitting there, someone kept asking if he wanted to sit, and the idea simply came to him on the spot. He wanted contrast. He wanted something unscripted in a room full of rehearsed lines. He called it unorthodox, but said the crowd was enthusiastic. His goal was simple: put the chair there and talk to Obama about broken promises. The fact that one of the most talked about political moments of the decade came from pure improvisation only added to its legend. Within hours, the response arrived from the White House. On August 31, 2012, President Obama's Twitter account posted a photo of him sitting confidently at the cabinet table with 3 words underneath: "This seat's taken." By Sunday afternoon, the tweet had been shared 51,400 times, becoming his second most retweeted post ever at that point. Only his May 2012 tweet supporting same-sex marriage had done better, with 61,500 retweets. The simplicity worked. Without arguing or attacking, the image flipped the narrative and turned mockery into a quiet show of authority. Away from cameras and crowds, Eastwood's personal life was moving just as quietly. In 1986, he bought the Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea for around $5 million, saving the 22-acre property from becoming condominiums. That same year, he served as mayor of Carmel, earning just $200 a month. Nearly 30 years later, in 2014, he met Christina Sandera while she was working there as a hostess. Within months, she moved into his home. The two were first photographed together in June 2014, leaving a Whole Foods in Brentwood, labeled by tabloids as a mystery woman. His children met her early and liked her immediately, describing her as normal and grounded. The relationship stayed private by design. Their first official public appearance came on February 22, 2015, at the 87th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theater. American Sniper was up for 6 Oscars that night. Over the next few years, Sandera appeared beside Eastwood at select premieres, including Sully in 2016, The 1517 to Paris in 2018, and The Mule later that same year. Their final red carpet moment together came in November 2019 at AFI Fest for Richard Jewell. She walked beside him with gray hair visible and no attempt to hide age or reality. Then they disappeared from public view again. The silence broke in the most painful way. On July 18, 2024, just 2 days after her 61st birthday on July 16th, Christina Sandera died suddenly at a hospital in Monterey County, California. Eastwood, then 94, released a statement the same day, calling her a lovely, caring woman and saying he would miss her very much. The death certificate later confirmed cardiac arrhythmia as the cause, with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease contributing. Medical data shows coronary artery disease is responsible for more than 60% of cardiovascular deaths and over 73% of sudden cardiac deaths in people over 35. The timing made the loss even heavier. A birthday had just passed. A decade together ended without warning. Months later, in January 2025, Eastwood's son Scott said his father was doing good and called him a survivor. He explained that resilience ran in the family. You do not complain. You do not whine. You just do. That mindset came from growing up during the Great Depression and living through World War II. By late 2024, reports suggested Eastwood had quietly entered another relationship, though no name was ever confirmed. Even grief did not fully stop his work. At 94, Eastwood directed Juror 2, his 42nd film as director. The movie premiered at AFI Fest in October 2024 and stunned critics with a 92% score on Rotten Tomatoes from 74 equipos, 74 reviews, and a Metacritic score of 73. Warner Brothers limited the release to fewer than 50 theaters and never reported domestic numbers, yet the film still earned $27.3 million internationally on a budget in the mid-30 million range. That performance easily outpaced Cry Macho from 2021, which earned only $16.5 million worldwide. Many critics called Juror 2 his strongest work since American Sniper. Then confusion returned. In May 2025, just days before his 95th birthday on May 31st, an Austrian newspaper published what appeared to be an interview where Eastwood criticized modern Hollywood and claimed he was preparing another film. Major outlets ran with it. On June 2, 2025, Eastwood shut it down, calling the entire interview completely phony and confirming he had not spoken to any journalist. Still, in January 2026, new reports surfaced. Industry insiders claimed he was again in pre-production, spotted on the Warner Brothers lot, quietly working. No title, no cast, just rumors. If Juror 2 ends up being the final chapter, most critics agree it is a far better ending than Cry Macho would have been. While it may not feel like a grand farewell, it shows that even at 94, Clint Eastwood could still deliver a sharp, thoughtful film. After more than 7 decades in the industry, that alone feels like a closing scene written exactly on his own terms.